Okay, welcome to another Rank Success podcast with me, Steve Cooper, and today I have a second interview with Simon Foy. I had a lot of feedback last time. His podcast that we did previously, the interview was listened to hundreds of times. I think it's just gone into over 1,000 in a short period of time. I had some great feedback, particularly from a fast track candidate who said they found the discussion to be very supportive in light of them going for fast track. And I'd just like to welcome Simon and say thank you very much for your time. And
pleasure, Steve. Always pleased to be back.
So our paths have crossed again, delivering some training in London area. And so I've kind of, on behalf of my listeners, taken the opportunity to ask Simon, and he's kindly volunteered again to share some thoughts and insights. So what I'd like to do is to crack straight on with it, as we're both going to catch a train away from here, and I want to make the best use of the time. So, and forgive me if you do hear a couple of seats squeaking in the background. We are sat on squeaky seats. We've tried to find ones that are not squeaky, and we've failed on that mission.
And Steve, I always sit rigidly still while I'm talking. Even I manage to sit still when I'm talking, not.
Okay. Okay, so there's just a couple of things I wanted to cover today, Simon. One was around officers who are, some of my listeners are inspectors, and they are aspiring beyond that, so towards superintendent and above as part of their career. Some of them are fast track, some of them obviously are focused on their CPD and the skill sets that are required. And the second issue I wanted to talk to you about in this podcast is just around the underrepresentation of women in policing, and just to get some thoughts and insights around that from you. So my first question to pose to you really is for those officers who are in the inspecting ranks at the moment, who aspire beyond the federated ranks, how does their skill set or their CPD and their development need to change or adapt to cross that Rubicon, if you like, into superintendent ranks and above? And what, if anything, is different for fast track candidates in that approach?
You know, Steve, when you asked me this question, there was a couple of sort of dilemmas that I had in my head. Really, you know, I'm going to happily expound a whole load of stuff about, you know, what that move between inspector, chief inspector up to superintendent means. Apart from, I think it still means quite a big wedge around pension and pension contributions. I don't know if it's still the same. It certainly was in my days. It was. But there is something that happens which is unique to that space, and I'm going to talk about that. But one of the things I wanted to make completely clear is that something I said in our original podcast, that the biggest jump that you'll ever make is that between PC and sergeant. So that is the time that you turn from, if you like, being a doer and a make things happener to, you know, as someone who has a greater responsibility and as a supervisor. So it is actually the most fundamental change. What you then have as you go up, and again, this is my opinion, what you then have as you go up through the ranks, through inspector, chief inspector, superintendent, chief superintendent, and even beyond that, is you just have a slightly different degree of change and a different degree of emphasis. But it's still a sort of logical process on the way up. But if you, and again, this is all my personal opinion, if you turn your attention to the specifics of how it moves between the federated ranks, inspector, chief inspector, to the superintendent, well, the clue is a little bit on the tin, in the sense that it goes from a federated rank to, you know, a smaller staff association, a superintendent's association, because something does happen when you go up that chain to that rank. And while you could say that the chief inspector rank, for example, is very much still a bit tactical, yes, you're a senior inspector, you are doing, you know, again, the clue is on the tin, you have an inspecting function, i.e. you're reviewing what others are doing. You're a senior leader in many police forces. You are, for example, you know, the role of senior investigating officer in a homicide command is a DCI rank, a detective chief inspector rank. So you are a senior leader, but you are going to be a slightly different type of senior leader. For me, the main thing, Steve, is that the picture gets bigger. So it starts with you have a bigger span of responsibility, so you might actually have to take an even bigger picture, an even bigger look about what your responsibility is. But I think it's almost purely at superintendent rank, it tends to be that you have a sort of a functional responsibility as much as you do a linear responsibility. And let me try and explain those two, big picture and the difference between functional and linear. Someone who has potential to be a superintendent rank, one of the first glimpses I used to get of what they did was they always saw the bigger picture, and they could, even if you asked them, they could go one step beyond. So let me just try and explain that again in English. If you're looking at a particular, I don't know, let's just pick on something like, why do domestic abuse, domestic assault, why does it happen? What are its causes? What's going on? And all the rest of it. Okay, on the one hand, you're talking about how do you respond to it? How do you make sure we treat victims properly? How do we investigate it properly? How do we prosecute it properly? How do we engage with other agencies about, trying to reduce and prevent it? All of that is a little bit tactical. By the time you get to the superintendent level, you should be thinking about how is this particular type of abuse manifesting itself in my particular area, if you have a geographic responsibility. What are the different, what are all the different responses that are being put in place by all these different agencies, and how am I going to play my part in bringing all those agencies together so potentially we can have a more coherent responsibility. And then the really tricky bit is, well, how does what we're doing fit into the national picture? So how are we delivering the policy of our force, or indeed, the MPCC guidelines or the College of Policing guidelines, how that's manifesting itself? Are we compliant to that? And is what we're doing right at the leading edge of what the latest approaches are to how you work collaboratively and collectively across different agencies into dealing with it. So you've noticed I've just used completely different languages. On the one hand, what is our tactical response about it, but on the other hand, what is our more strategic, our bigger picture environment, and what are we doing alongside everybody else, because we have a big responsibility to work coherently with others. So just the difference in the language I've used, to me, illustrates the gap. So the question is, well, what do you do to make yourself skilled in understanding what that gap is, and very selfishly, and I guess for your purposes, Steve, how do people get themselves sufficiently versed and experienced in that next level up, so that when they go into whatever selection process is, they can start to display it?
And I think there's something there also about, and we talked about it before, around just very much from constable to sergeant to inspector, you can survive, you can get by, you can get to those ranks by developing and working within a technical skill set that gets you there, and you stay there. It's very much around when you are an aspiring inspector, or in the inspecting ranks, an aspiring chief inspector. How do you drive your own development around acquiring those skills around interpersonal skills and the finities around that, relationship building, trust in adult relationships, those kind of skills that you'll need at the senior level? And how does that, coming back from that, how does that complement, supplement and run in parallel really with CPD activity, so taking on other development roles, exposing yourself to risk, taking on the management of corporate responsibilities in the organisation, like pace cover, duty cover, those kind of things, and being seen willing to do that.
Yeah, but I think what you're talking about, Steve, that maybe this is the wrong way of expressing it. That's the sort of easy stuff to do. That's just practicing it, the role, and being good at, and being appearing, hopefully, to be good at the actual role. So, pace cover, putting yourself, proffering yourself so that you can gain exposure and experience of what that particular role does. Don't get me wrong, that's absolutely essential. That's sort of taken as read. I think there's another side to your development, which you can do. Frankly, anybody. And this goes back a little bit to the second part of your question, which I think was, how does this apply to fast track? So this is something that non-fast track, if I could describe it, I nearly said normal, but non-fast track and fast track people can do. And to me, the biggest thing you can do is ask yourself the question: is what is actually going on here, and how does what we're doing fit with the bigger picture? And they may sound pretty basic questions, but it's sort of getting yourself into the discipline of looking at any operational scenario, and it can be any operational scenario, and then stepping back and saying, what is going on here? What actually is this about? And how is what I'm seeing in front of me, so if it's, an operational scenario that's developing, how does that fit within the bigger picture? So let me just try and explain what's in my head. You see, you see a deployment of police or policing to deal with a public order situation. Okay, it can be something that's regular, like a football match, or you can be that there's some indication that your force is going to be involved with one of those protest groups, the people that glue themselves to the motorway and all the rest of it. It seems to be the current flavour of the month going around. Okay, so suddenly they arrive on your doorstep. Now, of course, you'd want to make sure that you could respond to, and you might think that if you were being judged as your superintendent dealing with that sort of stuff, you might want to think that you want to make sure that you do all the right things technically. So you pre-plan, you're aware, you think through what you need to do, your people are appropriately briefed, there's coherence, there's command, there's certainty. Everybody goes into that situation as clear as they can do. Now that's the technical side. But what you can also do is, well, why is this happening? Why have we got people that are choosing to glue themselves to the road? Question one. Question two is, what is going on in terms of those people's right to freedom of expression, and the other freedom, which is the freedom of people to drive to work, along the M25? What's happening there? What is the result of policing getting involved with this one way or the other? So on the one hand, being too standoffish, if that's the right word, around how those protesters are working, or alternatively being too robust and ungluing them off the road because they're getting thoroughly fed up, like everybody else, with the fact that the roads are being blocked. So where is the appropriate level for policing to land? Who else is party to what's going on here? And I mean, who else can give you a better and more informed picture of what's happening? That's all into those mysterious world of the security services that provide a bit more intelligence, all the way through to how quick is the highways agency or the roads authorities to be able to respond quickly so that you can get in place something, you can recognise where these people are going to go, and you can do something which is a bit preemptive. But how do those two other agencies think about the same problem. And you don't necessarily have to have an answer, but as long as you're thinking about it, so that I hope this makes sense, so that when you're being judged about whether you're a good superintendent or not, you're able to display both things. You're able to display that you're able to get an operational grip that's appropriate to someone at your rank, taken as read. That's practice, experience, skills, technical things. But the other thing that I would be really interested in is, do you know what's going on here? On the one hand, it's about police resolving a demonstration, but on the other hand, it's about the role of police in the balance of between the right to go about your business and the right to protest, and some of the issues that can emerge if the police are seen to be going one way or another, and whether it's appropriate for the way that we police that event to have the right balance and understand what's going on. I hope I'm making sense here, in the sense that there's two sides to it. There's how do you deal with it operationally in terms of it at your level, but do you also understand how that operational response has to fit in with part of what the broader picture is. And the third part of my sort of hopefully not too complicated submission is, have you understood and judged whether what you've done operationally is appropriate according to the tactical demands, but also the strategic demands? And once you get a sort of template of that in your head, you can do it all the time. You look at anything. You can look at anything that you come across, and you can constantly test out whether your thinking is appropriate to understanding the bigger picture, and whether you can bring that thinking to how would you judge the success of an operational scenario. And good superintendents and people who, I think you used the phrase earlier, Steve, the world is full of frustrated chief inspectors who think they ought to be superintendents and all that sort of stuff. The world is full of them. But if I'm honest, the world is full of good superintendents who actually are just slightly more senior chief inspectors. I mean, that's the same at every rank. Really good superintendents who go into that rank, because the next one up is the sort of the OCU commander type role, where you have a bigger responsibility across a whole command area. It's that understanding of and appliance of the bigger picture into operational practice. And frankly, to some extent, you can either do that or you can't. You've either got the skills and attributes and experience and aptitude to do it, or you haven't. What you can do as a candidate in preparing is test out whether it blows your head trying to think about that sort of stuff, or whether once you start doing it regularly, A, you start to understand it more, and B, you get much more practiced in articulating it and expressing it. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it all makes sense, and thanks very much. I'm sure the listeners will be kind of picking up on that, particularly those that are aspiring to senior leadership positions, and there's certainly a lot in what you've just said there, not only in demonstrating that thinking and how you responded to that question, but I think those people listening have clearly got an idea about how they might start to develop that thinking as a means of part of their wider development. So thank you very much for those insights. And the second kind of theme, if you like, that I would like to move on to at the moment, I'm literally writing a trilogy or a quad, if you like, of blogs around supporting women, recognising some of the challenges that are facing women in leadership positions in policing, and also some of the wider issues that might prevent them moving into leadership positions and the underrepresentation. So, having sat on promotion boards as a panel member and chairing various interview and selection processes, Whilst I've got you here and linked to kind of the themes of that blog, are there any thoughts or insights that you might care to share that may be supportive for any aspiring women leaders that are listening, and especially around how forces can help with underrepresentation?
Yeah, I mean it's potentially quite a tricky question, Steve.
That's why I asked it.
Exactly.
And you can demonstrate that thinking there.
Yeah. I'm amongst friends. I've only been listened to by thousands of people. I'm sure nobody's going to hold me up. And let me say right from the start, this is always a difficult question for men, let's be blunt, to answer on behalf of women. It's really hard. Because I think there's enough going round which indicates that, that part of the issues around underrepresentation of women generally is that the thinking is dominated by men who think they know what, what's good for women. That's you know what I mean. It's quite hard to answer the question on the one hand because it's a slightly controversial subject, and often the feedback is from the, and I use this in the proper meaning of the word, the feminist perspective says that it's difficult for someone who is a man to truly understand the feminist perspective. Whether or not you agree with that, that's what it is said, and it is a valid point. And the feminist perspective is very strongly representative. I'm desperately proud of, for example, the fact that my daughter was the vice president of the Cambridge University Feminist Society, and trust me, she would drop this fairly continuously on my toes if I ever started to loosely pontificate about anything, and it was fairly savage feedback for which I was often suitably mortified and thoroughly put in my place by someone who was on a much higher intellectual plane than me in the first place. But that's a separate issue about my sort of slightly confused private life. I'm saying that because, if I appear to be sort of choosing my words carefully, it's not that I'm reticent around answering the question. It's I'm very conscious of the fact that I could, you could be coming across as a complete, misogynistic, without any clue of the world. I'm trying to do my best to express a view, from my perspective of someone who has, and let's get back to the actual question, worked with some unbelievably competent and inspiring women leaders who had the privilege to work for and have as a role model Cressida Dick as the Commissioner of the Met, and I was very proud to be one of her senior foot soldiers before she became Commissioner, but certainly she was my boss in specialist crime in the Met, and I thoroughly appreciated the experience of working for her, as I did with Lynn Owens, the now recently retired head of the National Crime Agency. So I've had, if you like, my fair share of really strong and powerful colleagues, role models, who I have huge respect for, who also happen to be women, and who also happen to have a substantive amount of skill, which I deeply respected. But the one consistent message, and I've probably, if I could riskily quote both Cressida and Lynn here, they have said to me that one of the things that would frustrate them was that at times women, competent, capable, skilled women, would be very self-deprecating about the level of their competence and experience. So in other words, they would only actually say, I can really do this, if they were 100% sure that they were indeed competent and experienced to do it. Whereas actually, there are an awful lot of men, and to some women to some extent, but there are an awful lot of men who will absolutely say they can do a lot of stuff when actually it's pretty clear that they can't. But there have been numerous occasions I've come across where men are far more bullish in expressing what they can do, overconfident indeed in expressing what they can do, whereas I've come across a number of women who, for a whole range of reasons, and none of them negative actually, are more circumspect about what their abilities are. And again, having sat in interview processes, having seen people who were colleagues who worked for me and with me submit themselves for promotion to the higher rank, I can see that sort of honesty not necessarily helping them. The tricky consequence of saying that is, are you saying we should be dishonest, or are you saying we should be a bit more, unnecessarily over the top about what we can do and what we can't do? And the answer partly to that is yes, because I think, and here I will choose my words very carefully, I think that I've come across numerous examples of female colleagues who have not been strong enough about expressing what exactly they can do, primarily because in their own minds they weren't entirely sure that they were. So how do you solve that dilemma? I was, when you suggested we might talk about this as a subject, I was having a little puzzle and a little think about that. Well, the answer is this. If you have that moment, when you're approaching a process that you're seeking to be selected for, and you lay out what your skills are, and that question comes into your head, I'm not sure I'm necessarily good at that, I'm not sure I've actually got the skills. The minute that comes into your head, I would say stop, ask someone if you are, and actually say, and they need to be people who you're confident with having some sort of honest conversation with. So you don't want to walk around the station or your work environment asking anybody you can come across. Make this a controlled conversation with people who you'll be confident will give you honest feedback and whose opinion you respect. Just test out on those areas where you don't think you're competent, just how competent you are. Because I'm absolutely fairly certain that the thing you'll get back is, well, of course you are. Of course you're competent. Of course you can do this. And I think that will give some female colleagues, an advantage in their own heads. Because that's all it is. It's not an advantage in anything else. It's just an advantage in their own heads. And once that confidence, yes, I can do this, is settled in your own mind, then you can be very clear in your expression about what you can do, rather than, and I hope I've made this point clear, if you have that slight edge of doubt in your own mind, however unfounded that may be, sometimes that shows out in an interview process. And sometimes even people, like me, who might recognise it because you don't say it, or because you don't demonstrate it, or because you don't tick that boxes, or because you don't collectively show that across to a whole range of people, sometimes you can't be given credit for. So you're only really putting into the mix, if you like, that competence which you're entitled to have credit given to you, and it moves you away from shutting out anything else other than focusing on what your entitlement is. Now, I reckon that can sometimes, you just make that slight adjustment, that can sometimes make the difference. And frankly, it's the only thing that I can think of, Steve, which would legitimately would deal with a process that in itself was legitimate. That the one thing that we know, whether it terms race or sex or whatever, that there's a load of unfairness and stuff going on about prejudice and all the rest of it. That's swirling around. That's a separate subject, which we all have a responsibility to do something about. But if you're saying a female colleague who is confident that the process is going to be fair and wants to get themselves best equipped to go into a fair process, take away that edge of uncertainty, which is sometimes caused a little bit by a degree of self-circumspection, self-reflection, self-doubt. And it's doubt only because they can't be they're not honestly set in your own mind that they think they're that competent. The easy way to do that is just to confirm that you are in fact that competent and take that doubt away by asking people. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. It makes tremendous sense, and I'm sure that people sat there listening will be following your chain of thought. I appreciate the sensitivity, and to a certain extent, I apologise for lobbing that grenade right in front of you in the way that
thanks.
I did.
We've got an easy question there. Can we talk about football?
Well, yeah, we could do, but I think the last bit of that question was just: is there anything from your experience that, in light of what you've just said, and understanding some of those sensitivities around that issue, and also the self-doubt issue, that's really good, because I'll be covering that in my blogs, is what you think that police forces can do to help support women candidates in terms of processes. So whether that's a better balance on promotion boards, whether that's a relook at the promotion selection processes, different tests, a combination of those. Is there anything that you think that could be done differently to help address that underrepresentation issue?
Yeah, and of course there's an easy sort of tension between positive action, positive discrimination. That's a fairly well rehearsed argument. How can you take positive action to deal with what is a perceived inequality, up to the point of the selection process being absolutely the same, men, women, different races. Can you pick out those things which potentially mean that candidates, be they of a particular sex or a particular race, don't do as well in displaying in the actual process themselves. And you can it's legitimate and it's lawful positive action to get them to that point, provided that they go into the process on an absolutely fair basis. And so for me, that if you recognise that subtlety, then there's loads of things that are potentially available for forces to do if they sat down and asked themselves the question: why aren't women getting through this process? Why aren't women applying for this process? Why do some women fall foul of the things you have, the hoops you have to jump through, the accreditation you have to have before you can be considered for a process? All that sort of stuff. You can do a whole load of analysis about what that's about and then try and do something about it. For me, and this is my personal view, I'm a huge believer in mentoring, and a proper mentoring relationship will help address all of that stuff. So somebody, it gives the advantage of having someone who is, passed through that gateway before, so they can give you the benefit of the experience about how they got through the gateway. That's great. Its primary focus is that they should be the person who objectively looks at, what is it with, and worked out collaboratively, what is it that that you need to do to make yourself a stronger candidate. Helps you with that process. And then a little bit attuned to my earlier complex argument, gives you the feedback which enables you to try and get a grip of that sort of thing. So it points you in the direction of, I don't know, doing different operational procedures, or understanding and learning a bit more about certain things, or working with other agencies, or whatever it is that you think you need to do. Having a mentor who's set themselves up as a mentor to try and develop you covers a whole range of things. So, I think, to be honest, I think if there are colleagues who are thinking, well, my force isn't doing it, there's nothing to stop you from approaching someone and saying to them, could you be my mentor? Now, interestingly, on this male-female thing, I think there's lots of male colleagues who could be mentors to female officers. It doesn't automatically have to be a female to female. It makes sense in a lot of ways, because a female to female mentorship, the female mentor has much more, has been through a few of the hoops, and so there's a whole lot of experience that can be shared back before you start. A male mentor of a female mentoree, is that right? There's a degree of, you have to clear all the ground and get things all sorts of sorted out, and that mentor has to be sufficiently skilled and adept at trying to understand what's going on to be able to feed it back. But it's not impossible. It's far more important to me to be mentored by someone who you professionally and personally respect, value their opinion, and with whom you can engage in a pretty honest and open, constructive feedback process. And if there is nobody in your organisation or close to you who you think is of that ilk, who is a female, have a go at seeing whether there's a male person. The one thing I would say on those occasions when I was approached and asked about that, I'll be perfectly honest, the flattery of it was wonderful, because someone was actually asking me to help them. That's whatever, in human interaction, it is always a wonderful thing. Someone is actually asking you for help. Most of us think that's fantastic. So there was a degree of flattery to it, but also there was a degree of it really made me think and encouraged me to think, well, I've got a genuine responsibility to this person now. They've taken the step to ask me to become their mentor. Well, my reaction to that was, oh gosh, thank you for asking me to be a mentor, and it's made me up my game to be a mentor to them. And of course, the wonderful thing that came out of all of that is I usually end up learning a lot more from them than they ever did from me. So it's very much a two-way thing. So it's not that difficult to do if you choose the right person and approach them in the right way. But clearly, the mentoring relationship is the gateway into a whole load of other stuff. But at its fundamental heart, it's actually someone putting a mirror up to you and allowing you to make that judgment, which, as we've said before, is sometimes a little bit undercooked stereotypically across some female colleagues, to make that judgment about whether I'm fit for this next stage or not. Amen.
Amen. Well, thanks very much for that, and I think it's good to finish on that theme of mentoring, which kind of covers both of those themes, really. The skill set required to advance, so having a mentor is fine, and also then the strength that might lend to aspiring women candidates to get yourself a good mentor, somebody who you professionally respect, somebody who can add value, if you like, to your career, and to share that journey of development as you go through. So the thing you said just now, just very quickly to finish around holding that mirror up to yourself, and essentially that's what all of this is around. Coaches, trained coaches, mentors are effectively a mirror to reflect back to an individual their position where they are at the time, and any gaps that they can fill to advance.
I agree, Steve. And the only thing is having sort of spouted out about mentoring and mentorees and all that sort of stuff, I think I wouldn't have said it if I didn't think it was important. The one thing I would say is on reflection a little bit, choose your mentor carefully, because I guess it's sometimes easy to think of someone could be a mentor because, I don't know, they're operationally competent and they appear to be, really good at what they're doing. It's important, but actually is this person going to fit with you? Because if you're going to do it properly and hold that mirror up, it's quite a powerful thing to do. And it can go either way. It can be a complete waste of time. It can be quite destructive if it's done wrong. So be careful about the type of person that you choose, and don't always think that the sort of most obvious, immediate, this person is obviously successful, therefore I want to replicate what they do. I don't think that's got to work. I think you need to find someone who has achieved things that you want to achieve. Yes, you do, but you need to also be careful when you think about whether that person is going to become your mentor, to think about the fit, and then spend quite a lot of time at the beginning of your relationship exploring with each other whether or not it's actually going to work. Because if you go straight from here's the relationship, there's the storming, norming, forming, off we go, and that's all quite quick, then you can get into the meat of what you're doing. You suddenly realise this isn't going to work because this person doesn't, we don't work together, and then you've got all the complication about extracting yourself out of it and not making people feel okay, and all those complications. Where actually, if you say, right, let's just spend a bit of time working out whether we're on the same page, we want the same thing, what are the rules, what are the engagement, what am I going to do, what am I not going to do, all that sort of stuff. Provided you do all that and you get that sorted out at the beginning, then the whole thing can move forward. But you need to spend a bit of time potentially thinking that relationship through before you get down to, if you like, the meaty stuff, the real crux of what the relationship is about. And to carry your helpful mirror analogy on before you even get the mirror out, to start seeing, if it's shiny enough, all that sort of stuff.
Okay, well, thanks ever so much for that. I mean, that's 45 minutes, just given us just enough time to drink this cup of tea that we made just beforehand.
Which you made for me, Steve.
And hopefully
one of your many talents.
Hopefully the chairs haven't squeaked too much through this, but we've definitely covered a lot of ground in a short period of time, and I hope that for listeners there are some meaningful insights and tips and guidance, and we will be back hopefully at another date in the future when our paths cross, and I will certainly be back with another podcast in due course, and until then, take care and stay safe.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Simon.